Right. No. You can't see.
So we're going to start chapter 8 today, right? In last chapter, the Gyan Vigyan Yoga, essentially Bhagwan Ji taught us that he is the root cause of everything, right? He is the root cause of everything of this world. And cognition of this fact, understanding of this fact is called Gyan Yoga, connection to the Lord through the Gyan, through knowledge. Then he shows us the Vigyan, right? Vigyan, the practicality, which means the understanding the process through which he manifests the one into many. That is Vigyan. Being able to recognize him as the source cause when we look at various aspects, various things in this world, even when it doesn't feel like he's apparent, right? When it is not apparent, being able to see him as the source of the things that we look at in this world, that is Vigyan, right? So there is the knowledge, and then there's a translation of knowledge in practical terms in this world, which is Vigyan. And how we're talking about what did he reveal? He showed us examples of being able to see him where he's not apparent. For example, being able to see him as the essential nature of things, like fluidity in case of water is him. The prakash, the energy, the light energy that we see in the moon or the sun is him, right? Or the seed behind the tree is him. So being able to recognize him like this, these are the kind of examples he gave to us. Then now that we know what is Gyan, what is Vigyan, what is Agyan? Agyan would be knowing or thinking that this diversity that we see in this world is actually real, right? That is Agyan, ignorance. Now, in the last two shlokas, God then told us the attainment of those who seek liberation by seeking refuge in him. And he says that such a person will understand Brahma. He will realize me. And realizing me means he will understand the true nature of Brahma at the time of his death. He will understand the true nature of Brahma. He will understand the true nature of, Adhyatma, Adidev, Adibhut, Adiyagya. So he uses all these terms and says, this is the attainment of the person. Such a person will be released from the clutches of death and old age. And he will realize all these various things, right? So in chapter 8, the chapter 8 is going to open with Arjun asking the meaning of these terms. So he will, that's the first thing he asks, right? And as we go through the chapter, in this chapter, now Bhagwanji will take us at a deeper level through the process through which he is going to manifest from one to many, right? So we've understood there is one, that's the knowledge. We've understood the many part of things, right? We've understood that part. Now, what are we going to understand? We will understand the process, how the world of many evolves from that which is one, the one immutable Brahma. Okay, so we'll get subtler and subtler in our understanding of him and his Maya, how he manifests, his powers. Okay, so that's what we are going to do in chapter 8. So let's start. Kavita, will you start? You'll do the Om Paramatmane Namaha part? Or do you want me to say it before you do?
Please say that.
Okay. Om Paramatmane Namaha Ath Ashtamo Adhyayaha.
Akshara Brahma Yoga, the yoga of immutable transcendence. Introduction. In the 7th chapter, the Lord introduced Arjuna to the awareness of the transcendental. The Lord also spoke of direct perception and total perception as the methods of attaining him. The cognition of the Supreme Being, who, though one, manifests himself in diverse forms through nature, is called jnana or direct perception. The realization of the process whereby the one supreme being appears in phenomenal manifestations is called vijnana or total perception. And to accept the diversity of the phenomenal world as reality is called ajnana or ignorance. Now, in the 8th chapter, the Lord would explain how the phenomenal world evolves from the supreme transcendence. This awareness helps in clear visualization of the transcendence, which is supreme and immutable. This is why this chapter is called the Yoga of Immutable Transcendence. Shall I continue? Okay. Connection. While concluding the 7th chapter, the Lord is said in the last 2 shlokas that the deliberate effort to free oneself from death and old age by taking refuge in Him leads to the comprehension of the Supreme Being and all of His faculties. This statement prepared the ground for Arjuna's question as follows.
So just to add a little bit of context here, right? So I think we've talked about this several times in the past, which is that we are all a manifestation of Bhagwanji, right? Jivatma is nothing but a piece of him that exists within us. In the previous chapter, as part of understanding how the world gets manifested, he also told us that the whole world is made up of him. Whether it's animate or inanimate, there is an expression of God in everything around us. It is just our inability to see it because we operate more at the gross level rather than the subtle level. And chapter 7, he explained that quite well. And like I was mentioning in the previous class, chapter 8 and chapter 9 will get more and more subtle. But in chapter 8, he gives us terms, actual terms to understand all of these different ways in which he manifests around us, right? So I think the next few shlokas, we will be discussing each of these terms to help us understand where we are and why our role is so special to be able to reach liberation. So we'll be walking through that journey. Yeah.
Anna, will you read with us?
She already read the connection.
Yeah. Arjun Uvacha.
Arjuna Uvacha.
Kim tad brahma kim adhyatmam.
Kim tad brahma kim adhyatmam.
Kim karma purushottama.
Kim karma purushottama.
Adhibhutam cha kim proktam.
Adhibhutam cha kim proktam.
Adhidaivam kim uchyate.
Adhidaivam kim uchyate. Arjuna
There are 2 shlokas that are one after the other. So
okay.
Adhiyagyah katham kotra.
Adhiyagyah katham kotra.
Dehe asmin madhusudana.
Dehe asmin madhusudhana.
Prayana kale cha katham.
Prayana kale cha katham.
Gyeyo asi niyatatmabhi.
Gyeyo asi niyatatmabhi.
Kim is what is. What is? Tat vaha, that. Brahma, the supreme transcendence. Adhyatmam is the individualized self. Karma is what we typically call as the action. But we'll realize what is the subtler meaning of this now. Purushottamam is the best among the people, which is Arjun. Adibhutam, physical entity. We've seen, right? Bhut is the word that we use. Bhut is for the entities and all. We always use the word bhut. So physical entities. Proktam is said to be. Adhidevam is the spiritual entity. Uchyate, what is called.
And the second shloka.
Oh yeah. Adhiyagyaha is the ritualistic entity. Katham, how are. Ko atra, kaha is who are. Atra, here. Dehe, in the body. In body. Asmin, this. Madhusudan is reference to Krishna. Prayan kale, at the time of death. Cha is and. Katham, how are. Gyoasi, cognized or recognized. Niyatatma bhihi is niyat atma bhihi, persons with disciplined minds.
You can read that, Alex.
Yes. Arjuna asked, what is that Brahman, the supreme transcendence? What is Adhyatma, the individualized self? What is karma, functioning of or action? O most superior. What is meant by Adhibhuta, the physical entity, and what is said to be Adhidaiva, the spiritual entity? O Madhusudana, which is the ritualistic entity and how is it placed in the body? And how are you cognized at the time of death by a person with disciplined minds?
So
The seven, yeah.
So in Shloka 1 is nothing but a direct question from the last shloka of the last chapter, right? He heard these terms, and just like you and I will have the same questions, like what does all this mean? Arjun is representing us, right? So he's asking the exact same question. And just like we are proponents of logic and science, in the previous chapter, Bhagwanji mentioned that he expresses himself everywhere in matter. We all have a piece of him which is connected. So now he's asking the most logical question, which even we would ask, is how does this work? How is it placed in the body? What happens at the time of death? Like, these are all logical questions we would want to ask ourselves, and Arjun is representing us in that journey, right? So we're just understanding, he's helping us in our journey as we walk with him, right? So now you can continue reading.
The 7 questions of Arjuna. In these 2 shlokas, Arjuna has asked the Lord about the 7 topics mentioned by the Lord in the 2 concluding shlokas of the 7th chapter. These 7 topics need some explanation. Before this explanation is given, it would be necessary to observe that the 7 topics are relevant only for those who live a life of self-discipline with a sincere and earnest desire for self-perfection. They would hardly have relevance for people who lead a life of self-indulgence and have only a casual interest in these topics. This caution is necessary because those who have no sincere and earnest desire for self-perfection have little more than a tourist's interest in these important matters and are motivated only by idle curiosity. Their minds are not conditioned to grasp the subtleties of these subjects, but the Lord would be eager to lay bare even the most secret mysteries of his divine self to an earnest seeker.
So this is a very straightforward explanation, but a very important one, that you, like, even in the previous chapters we've discussed, you don't ask questions for the sake of asking questions, right? You ask questions with the intent to understand. And Arjun now is asking these questions, even though we've heard of this previously. Like, he shared these concepts early on, right? In chapter 2, he's talked about some of these concepts. But he's asking them now because he's gone through a particular journey where he can now appreciate some of the subtleties. So even for us, right, we only ask the questions that we are ready to understand. But as you work on your antakaran, on your subtle body, become an earnest seeker, the questions you ask, the same question will give you a subtler response. So that is why they say, Gita kabhi ek baar nahi padhi jati hai. You will come to the same Gita, you will read it 10 times, but each time you read it, you'll be asking yourself maybe the exact same question, but the answers you will get out of it will become subtler and subtler and subtler, because you are more prepared to appreciate and grasp the subtle truth. So in round one of the Gita, we literally just understand the the first level, just to understand the purpose and the structure of the Gita. But round 2 and 3, as we go through, as we work around Antakaran, if you will become appreciative of more of the subtleness that exists within.
No, but don't let that make you think that, don't let it reduce your this thing, right? Like, oh, it's okay if I don't understand stuff, or like I don't want to like put in enough effort because it's only my first time. So don't let what Abhinav has just said become an excuse for yourself for not putting in the sadhana or this thing, right? Like, so but yeah, I mean, every time you'll read Gita, you will get subtler with your intellect. And as Kumar and Shalini Didi always say, you go through Gita 10 times, 11th time, Gita will go through you. Right, so, do the next shloka. Left Sanchita, will you read to this?
In the succeeding shloka, the Lord explains the terms Brahman, Adhyatma, and Karma. The Lord says,
Shri Bhagavanuvacha
Shri Bhagavanuvacha
Aksharam Brahma Paramam
Aksharam Brahma Paramam
Swabhavodhyatma Uchyate
Swabhavodhyatma Muchyate
Swabhavo Adhyatma Uchyate
Swabhavo Adhyatma Muchyate
Bhut Bhavodbhavakaraha
Bhuta Bhavo Bhavakaraha
Visargah Karma Sangyataha.
Visarga Karma Samjataha.
So Aksharam is jiska kshay nahi ho sakta, one that cannot be destroyed, that which cannot die, that which does not fade out, which also means that which is never born. Which cannot die means it can never be born. Anything that is born must die. Aksharam. Brahma is that supreme transcendence that we are referring to. Paramam is supreme. Swabhav is the essential nature. Adhyatma is Adhyatma. Uchyate is called. Bhut Bhavodbhavakaraha is that which gives rise to urges in beings. Bhut is beings, Bhav is the urges that we are referring to. Okay. So that which gives rise to urges in the beings. Visargaha is tyag, the sacrifice. Karma is the karma. Sangyataha, naam se kaha gaya hai, has been referred to as. Yeah.
The Lord said, supreme immutability is Brahman, his essential nature of selfhood, as repeated in the individualized awareness, is Adhyatma. The transpose giving rise to the creative urge for beings is karma or functioning. Brahman, the supreme immutable transcendence, that which is not subject to transformation and which neither wanes nor perishes, is called immutable or changeless. In fact, perishing is the ultimate state of waning or fading out. That which is not subject to this waning or fading out would be changeless or immutable, and that which transcends even the sense of change would be called supreme immutable transcendence, Brahman.
So the easy way to understand Brahman is visualize what was there before everything started and what will be there after everything ends. There is something, that energy, that supreme state is Brahman. that state that is there all around us, in which we show up for a fleeting period of time. That is Brahman.
And Brahman is a combination of three key elements. If you take any one element out of it, it doesn't remain Brahman. So the three key elements are Sat, Chit, Anand. Sat, Chit, Anand. These are the three essential characteristics of Brahman. Sat is eternal, what we just read, immutable. Sat is what? Satya, right? Satya, that is that which always is. Anything that is always not is
Asat.
unreal, asat, right? So Sat is him. And again, like I said, it is the characteristics. Actually, that word is wrong. It is not the characteristics of him. It is him. It is not as if like there is something that owns these things. It is him. It is what he's made up of. So he's a combination of three elements is a much better way of putting it. So Sat, the eternal part of him, right? Chit is the consciousness principle. Chit is the consciousness. He is consciousness himself. And Anand is the bliss. He is bliss. He does not have bliss. He does not experience bliss. He is bliss, right? So he is the combination of these three main elements, Sat, Chit, Anand. Let's read.
Adhyatma, the individualized self. It is the inherent nature of the transcendent to be conscious. This consciousness is manifested as a sense of individual selfhood, and this being his essential nature is called Adhyatma.
So, in other words, what is Adhyatma? Us. Our soul and our subtle body, our consciousness is Adhyatma. The nature, the inherent nature of the transcendent to be conscious. This conscious, and that's what he's given us, humans, right? It's given us the ability to be conscious. He's given us a piece of his energy, soul, and he's given us body, mind, and intellect, through which we can do the next part, which is karma. What is interesting, connecting what Adhyatma is with Brahman, because our most subtle element, which is the soul, not the characteristics, the soul's inherent nature is Sat, Chit, Anand, just like Brahman, right? As Adhyatma, in this world, that's what we always chase. We always chase truth, always want to be true, always want to be seen as true, and we always chase truth, facts, truth. We chase Chit as consciousness, but it also chases, another way to understand it is freedom, the freedom of choice. We chase freedom. And the third is bliss, that we understand. We chase it on a daily basis. So unconsciously, we are aware this is actually our true nature, and we are trying to find it in physical manifestation of the world by doing things. But in reality, it all exists within us. That's when we say, when we work on our subtle body, our divinity shines through. It's the Sat, Chit, Anand that will shine through. Make sense? Okay.
And to take it to a more subtler level, right now, what is Jivatma? Jivatma is that individualized self that we talk about, right? So there is Brahma and then there is Jivatma. When he goes from one to many, he creates Jivatmas, right? Jivatma is not just the Jivatma of a human being. It is a Jivatma in any conscious thing out there. It could be the consciousness principle, or the Jivatma is there in every plant, in every animal, right? So anything that is conscious has a Jivatma. Okay. So within now we have to try and grasp the subtler parts of it. So far, we've been saying Jivatma, right? Now, there is an essential nature of Jivatma too. There is something that is subtler, which is the principle which gives rise to Jivatmas, right? It's like saying there is a framework and then there is an application of the framework which gives rise to a particular instance, right? So Jivatmas are the instances, the framework or the subtler principle that underlies that Jivatma, that is the consciousness principle, because the essential nature of the Jivatma is consciousness, which is what separates the animate from the inanimate. And that consciousness principle, the Chit part of Satchitanand, that consciousness principle is called Adhyatma. There is a different word for it, right? Otherwise, you won't have a different word for it. We'll just call it Jivatma, correct? So that is why. Now you have to understand Jivatma is an instance of Adhyatma. The essential nature of Jivatma is Adhyatma. You get it? So here now we're moving to subtler and subtler meanings of things. We're moving away from gross towards, higher and higher understanding. That's Adhyatma.
So, so I think one more thing I'll add here before we read the karma element. So when Brahman existed,
when Brahman did not exist.
Sorry, when nothing existed. Sorry, when nothing existed before Big Bang and everything else, what was the first act of Brahman or God? The first act was that of sacrifice, where he broke himself into many different parts and gave life. And we'll read about that in the next shloka. But that very act of sacrifice also created an urge of activity, a surge of activity, which is what we're going to read next.
Karma, the creative urge. Ordinarily, the term karma connotes action or functioning with its implication of activities, toil, and effort. But the actual significance of the word karma is more subtle and spiritual. It can be understood in this manner. When two sheets of water at different levels are connected, immediately a flow of water results. There would be no flow if the level is the same. Similarly, action or functioning results when there is difference in two states. Now the supreme transcendence is one without a second. All scriptures of the world ascribe creation to a primal creative urge in the one to manifest himself as the many. This creative urge is a tremendous transpose in the state of one who is without a second, and it is brought about by only his power to manifest himself as many. The ocean, which is one entity, is manifested in the shape of numerous waves. Though this may be taken to be a transpose in its primal nature of being one, in reality it does not affect the oneness of the ocean. In the case of the Supreme, this transpose is reflected in the activation of nature for the creation of different beings, and it is the foundation of all functioning and actions, karma.
Right. Now, karma, we've come across this term several times, right? The entire first 6 chapters have been around karma. And we have understood karma as our activities that we do, right? And we've also gone to a subtler level where we say that karma is not just action. It all starts at the thought level, right? So thought, bhav, karma, right? The actual action. All of these constitute karma. We've always said that karma is not just the actions that you do. Karma starts at the thought level. The moment you've thought of something, it is as good as having done the karma, right? So now we're going at even a subtler level, again at a framework level. Like Jivatma is an instance, the framework is Adhyatma, the basic principle behind it. Similarly, now we're trying to understand what causes karma in the first place. And that is the reference that is being given here. Now, there's a very good example that has been created here, that then whenever the example we've given is water, right? If there is a difference in this, if there's difference in two sheets of water, whether it is because of levels or because of temperature difference, it creates a flow. If there is a difference in two states, that causes action, it causes activity until there is equilibrium, right? So we've seen that this is what causes all of the water currents in the oceans, as an example. There is that subtle principle that causes one state and the other state to merge towards an equilibrium. That principle is called karma. And how did that first emerge? It emerges from Bhagwanji himself. Bhagwanji, the Lord, the Brahman, was one. He has a primal instinct in him, a primal creative urge to create. It was that primal urge to create where he said that I will go from one to many. Eko ham bahusyami. That primal creative urge is karma, because that primal creative urge is what causes people to think. It is what causes us to act. Okay. Now, that primal creative urge is now reflected in all of us, in everything that we do, whether it is reproduction, right? It's a primal creative urge, is how we define the drive for reproduction. Similarly, when we are creating a piece of art, when we are creating a new process, when we are creating something, when we are working in our offices, all of this, now these are animate examples, right? In an inanimate world as well, every single activity that creates something, that creates movement, whether it is difference in states, whatever, right? Water flowing, air, the breeze is blowing, everything, all activity in this world is driven by that creative primal urge. If that creative primal urge were not there, there would be no action in this world. And all of that creative primal urge finally works towards creating an equilibrium. That creative primal urge then goes from it first went from one to many, and then it also creates the impetus to go from many to one. I don't know why it's not coming up. Can I remove this background thing? It's great. Just give me a second. It's disturbance. Okay. Yeah. So that is what is being referred to as karma, right? Another layer of subtlety. We have to now move to subtler and subtler parts. And why are we moving to subtler and subtler parts? Why are we trying to get to these levels of frameworks now? Is because we are trying to understand how the process through which Bhagwanji goes from one to many, the process of Gyan moving to Vigyan, the process through which he manifests himself in the world. When we understand how he manifests himself in this world, then we'll start to understand how we are creating our lives. Everything that we are learning here, this is not theory, right? There's no point in just understanding these technical terms. Right? Why are we trying to understand this? Everything, end of the day, has to move back to my me story. If we do not connect it back to my me story, then we're not understanding what we're doing. Right? So, end of the day, Brahma is reflected in us as a Jivatma through Adhyatma. So then, if I am the God of everything I create, I have the same creative urge as the primal creative urge that Lord has, then I have the ability to create my life, right? If I have the ability to create my life, how am I creating my life? That creative urge, that karma, can now be expressed. It's in my hands to either express it in divine terms or express it in demonic terms. And how I express it is going to then determine the quality of my life around me, right? So everything has to go back to my me principle. And when it comes back to my me principle, it helps me understand how powerful I am. and it helps me take full responsibility of my life, my choices. And then it starts to help me see that I can make choices today which will help me become not just at a very low level. It will help me become a better version of myself, but the same concept of becoming a better version of myself will help me go from the animalistic natures towards my divine characteristics, and then will eventually help me merge with him. So we will stop saying that I have no responsibility, that I have all of these things going on around me, and hence I'm not able to be a certain person, do certain things, or I behave in certain ways, right? Everything has to connect back to me. So understand all of these concepts and then try and connect them back to who you are being and how we are living our lives, how we are making choices.
So the other thing to add here, right, is because of this creative urge, this primal urge that Bhagwanji had, which he shared with all of us, it is a given that we will always be in action. We will always be doing karma. Now it is up to us whether we do that karma with Yagya Bhav, with Lok Sangra, some of the principles we talked about in chapter 3, or we do it out of selfish or egoistic or small-minded or pettiness. And that would define how our life would unfold. It would either, like Tuvina said, unfold towards divinity or unfold towards animality.
And this is what is called we hear, when we read all these Puran stories and all, right, we hear of devs, we hear of rakshas, we hear of all kinds of asurs, right? And then we hear of these 7 nether worlds, the 7 higher worlds. Everything exists inside of us, right? So we have asuri tendencies, we have rakshasi tendencies, we have devi tendencies, and devi tendencies are what are inherent to us. They are inside of us. Rakshasi and Asuri qualities we acquire from outside. These are the impurities we acquire from outside. Because our essential nature is what? Our essential nature is Brahma. Our essential nature is that Jivatma. Jivatma is we, and our essential nature is Brahma. And Brahma is Sat Chit Anand. He is pure. So our essential nature is pure. All impurities are taken in from outside. So all we have to do to realize our essential nature is to cleanse ourselves of those impurities that we have collected over a period of time. And that is why we are focusing on antahkaran ki shuddhi and not outside world. As we do our antahkaran ki shuddhi, as we cleanse ourselves, divinity will shine forth by itself. We have to do nothing about it. We don't have to acquire knowledge from outside. The knowledge will shine forth from inside as we cleanse ourselves. As Arjuna will say at the end of Gita, now I remember. Right? So that is our whole journey. That's why all the focus that we do, everything goes back to the same thing. All roads lead to Rome, right? So we have to keep reminding ourselves. Otherwise, when we do all of these different concepts, different things, then we tend to lose ourselves, right? So I'm just bringing all of us back to it so that we do not lose ourselves in the trees and forget like what the forest is. So that, keep going down to the level of details and then keep coming back up to the macro level to understand where are we going with this? What is our ultimate goal? Okay. So Rita, will you read with us? Sorry, we have not finished this, right? Karma.
Yeah.
Sorry. Please. Sanchita, please go ahead. Read. Sorry, we didn't finish the last paragraph.
No, we finished. I read till karma.
Getting lost. Rita, please go ahead. Connection.
Yeah. Now the Lord takes up the terms Adi Bhuta, Adi Devya, and Adi Yagni.
Adibhutam Ksharo Bhavaha.
Adibhutam Shiro Bhavaha.
Purushascha Daivatam.
Purushascha Devyatam.
Adiyagyo Hame Vatra.
Adhiyagyo hame vatraha.
Patra.
Vatra.
Dehe deha bhratamvara.
Dehe deva vratanvaraha.
Vara. There's no halant in the end, right? Two dots.
Var.
Halant.
Yeah, var.
So Adhibhut is Adhibhut, the word. Ksharo, perishable. Bhavaha, nature. Purush is the Purush that is being referred to here is the Brahma, the divinity. Adhidaivatam is the Adidev, the word there that we are going to try and understand. Adhiyagyo is again Adhiyagya. Hame Vatra is which that pervades the indwelling spiritual entity. Dehe Deha Bhratam Vara is in the body. Dehe Bhratam, O superior being. Okay, let's read.
Perishability is the nature of Adhibhutya, the physical entities. Divinity is the Adhidevya, indwelling spiritual entity. And O superior being, I myself pervade this body as Adhiyagna, the ritualistic entity. Adhibhuta, the ever-changing physical entities. The physical entities are only appearances, with the essential characteristics of appearing for some time and then disappearing into nothingness. In the history of the world, mighty kingdoms have appeared, held complete sway on large multitudes, only to disappear one knows not where. Stupendous structures made their appearances towards high in the eyes of everyone, yet today, even the places where they stood are the subjects of only vague conjectures. This truism points to the ever-changing and ultimately perishable nature of physical entities. These appearances materialize with the concept of names and forms, which endow them into the characteristics of tangibility. But due to the ever-changing nature of names and forms, these appearances are never stable. Appearances characterized by these qualities are called adhibhuta or physical entities. This changeability is also activated by the power of Lord, who himself is immutable. For example, the waters of the ocean are vaporized by the heat of the sun, which is millions of kilometers away. The vapor turns into lords of different shapes and sizes. The clouds again fall into the ocean in the shape of rain. The sun, however, remains unaffected and unchanged by these transformations. Similarly, the power of the Lord activates nature into different forms and names. These appearances, which are subject of continuous changes, are called adhibhut.
So Adhibhut is what we have always seen, basically Maya is the power of Bhagwanji, which helps to create an illusion of these diverse transient forms. Everything we see in this world is, everything that we see in this world is basically changeable, right? Everything is changeable. That power of changeability is also provided by the Lord. Now, Lord is immutable, yet he has the power to create mutability in this world. Everything in this world that is imbued with this power, with that power of mutability, is called Adhibhut. Okay? So that at a very that is a subtle way of understanding it. But because everything in this world is actually imbued with that power of mutability, of changism, that is why you can at a slightly grosser level say that Adhibhut is everything that we see with changes. Basically, everything in this world is Adhibhut. Why? Because it has got that power, but it is that subtle power which creates that mutability, which is called Adhibhut.
So in other words, it's basically Lord expressing himself through matter. Matter is all around us. It's Lord expressing himself through matter.
Great.
Adidevya, the divinity which is the eternal witness of ever-changing appearances. Adidevya is a divinity or the indwelling spirit which witnesses and consumes the ever-changing appearances. On the disintegration of the physical bodies, all unfulfilled aspirations and desires are concentrated at macro level in Adidevya, which fulfills them in subsequent lives by equipping the Jivatma with the intellect, mind, and senses, along with the physical form appropriate for fulfilling these aspirations. Even though this entity is divine, yet being associated with the senses and physical organs, it has characteristics that are different from the absolute divinity. This manifestations of the absolute divinity is called Adidevya.
Now, we've always talked about the fact that there is the body, the gross body, it dies, right, and then it disintegrates into the 5 elements, because the body is made of 5 elements. It disintegrates into that. What survives after death? We say that there is a subtle body that survives, right? Now, we have always defined the subtle body as composing of mind, intellect, and ego. And this is where there's also a 4th part to it, which is chitta, which is where the imprints of, or the memories of all that we have done stays. But it also has all the imprints. So in mind, body, and ego, and the chit combination, there is that our desires, what we want to do, or any unfulfilled aspirations, everything is stored in there. And this is what creates our destinies. It creates our prarabdha. It creates our the destinies of the next world, and how our next life is going to be created. The blueprint of that, it gets created from all of this. So far we have said that this is the subtle body that survives. Now we are taking one step more subtle. So what we are saying is, it's like, okay, yes, all of these things are there, but what happens is that you can zip this up into a subtler format. You zip it up in a subtler format, and it is Adhidev. There is that entity, there is that concept, there is that principle of Adhidev, which actually carries these things for us. These imprints, these memories, all of this, our prarabdha, is actually carried in a subtler form in the concept, in an entity called Adhidev. And when the right time comes, Adhidev then sprouts forth the right type of mind, intellect, and ego. And then they sprout forth and create a physical body as well, to be able to express itself in a physical life. Okay, so there's a subtle body, and then there's a subtler form of that. So imagine data being compressed and zipped up, right? So that subtle body is now being zipped up in a subtler format called Adhidev, which will then create these other subtler formats at a later point of time. Does that make sense?
Tuhina, I have a question. Here, the subtle body is made up of ego, intellect, and mind. Okay. So the Adideva is like, saying Chit is the Adideva because it has all these impressions, and also the unfulfilled aspirations, all this consciousness part of it. Is that Adideva, is it? Or like everything put together?
All of that together. So it's the principle behind this. Mind, intellect, ego, chit, all of this doesn't exist any longer, right? At a subtler level, this is the blueprint. Adidev is even a blueprint of all of this. So it will create, it's like mind, body, intellect will then create, it's like thought. So, and the bhav creates a certain type of actions. It gets transformed in a certain type of action, right? Similarly, Adhidev is that principle, that will then create your mind, intellect, and ego at a later stage. It will create an instance. Okay, so there is an instance of mind, body, intellect in Kavita. There is an instance of mind, body, intellect in Tuhina. But there is that subtler thing behind it which creates this.
The other way to phrase it is it's the witness. It is the observer. So at the micro level, Tuhin has explained, it is the witness within which everything is being recorded and seen, and it takes everything away and, like Tuhin explained, as a bag, and it moves on. On the gross plane, right, in the macro level in the world, it is manifested in the form of celestial bodies. So again, those celestial gods, those celestial bodies, they're not God. Bhagwanji has previously mentioned, they have divine qualities, but they're not God. But they're the observers, they're the keepers, they're the people who are maintaining certain parts of our principles of our world and nature. Right? So the Adi Deva essentially is that witness, it's that observer that keeps things in check. Right? So if you connect it to the previous shloka, Tuina's example, right? Adi Bhuta is the matter, the gross form, the actual body, the actual karam, everything this body is doing. Adi Deva is that witness, which is the subtle plane behind mind, body, intellect, that is keeping track of what the Adi Bhuta is doing.
Right.
Keeping its score in check.
Okay. So our soul is also, the kind of, what I understood was like soul is also witness for everything, whatever is happening. So the Adideva and soul is the same, or
It is.
Okay, can I take that? So you're right. Soul is the witness, right? Now, how do you translate? End of the day, we are getting subtler behind the principle. So when you come down, it's like this, right? It's a tower. We're now going from here to there, right? Now, this is soul. Soul is your Jivatma. Okay. Right. Jivatma has Adhyatma because there's a consciousness principle, but then it also has Adhidev as a part of it, right? So soul is the Jivatma, which is the Adhyatma. It is the witness, right? The consciousness principle. Below that is your mind, intellect, and everything, right? You remember that chart, the consciousness principle, and then that chart where we say mind, body, intellect. Now that mind, body, intellect, that concept, it has a subtler principle behind it, and that principle is Adidev.
Okay.
Right? And you said the word chitta, right? Chitta is a very, very, very complex word. So I don't think I have the capacity to even, I definitely don't understand it fully, and I do not have the capacity to explain it either, but I'll tell you the small parts of it. It is in several places. Chit is, as we say, it is the consciousness principle. So it is part of Adhyatma. But Chit is also where the memories are stored. And so it will also affect your Adhidev, right? So Chit is a much, much bigger concept. That's why even in Kumar's class, we do not talk about it, because we need much higher levels of subtlety to be able to start to even appreciate the concept of Chit. So
can we think it as a subconscious mind, or it is more than that?
Way more than that, right? Subconscious mind is a very, very gross form of mind that we understand. We're talking of levels way deeper than what science has ever gone to. So there are no real English words for these concepts, right? There are no English words, because we are moving beyond where science has gone. We are moving to the framework aspects, the blueprints that then create all these other things. So Adidev is like that blueprint which will carry your mind, body, and mind, intellect, and ego. This is where this is where it will say, okay, so Adidev is what will see that and create that. So when he's saying it's a witness, it basically means this is where all of those things, the essential characteristics will get stored, the essential characteristics. And from that essential characteristics, as and when it is required, when the conditions are right, a mind, an intellect, and a suitable ego sprouts forth based on what you have done in your past.
So let me give you another example. And this may not be a perfect example, but the soul, for you to understand, is like the sun. The sun gives light. It gives heat. It gives energy. It's a witness, but it doesn't get involved. Right. And you cannot affect it by doing anything. Your mind, body, ego cannot touch it, cannot dilute it. Your soul never gets tarnished. Your soul just is, right? This is like, you can, I mean, cloud is not a very good example, but imagine a layer in the middle of soul and our body, which has divine characteristics, but it also associates with the subtle body. So it is what carries our prarabdha forward, our vasanas forward, without our soul getting tarnished. Not without, because our soul cannot do it. Our soul is literally just the divine light.
Right.
Yeah. So Adhidev is under that. Adhyatma is in that consciousness principle. So it is, if we look at that, the 23 elements and all we see, right? So Adhyatma sits in the consciousness principle at the soul level. Adhidev is below that. It is just above your mind, intellect, and ego.
Okay.
Yeah. But so it is fairly divine. It is very divine, but it is still associated with these, the concept of Sat, Raj, Tam and all, right? So it is not, it won't have the same characteristics as the absolute Brahman. Whereas Adhyatma will have the characteristics of the absolute Brahman. The essential nature of Adhyatma is absolute Brahman. But Adhidev is associated with the Sat, Raj, Tam. So it becomes slightly different. Make sense?
Thank you.
Adhiyagna, the ritualistic entity. The common concept of a ritual among Hindus is a religious ceremony or observation in which oblations are offered to the sacred fire. This simile has been used to exemplify the activities which are always taking place in the body. All the sensory and motor organs are conceived as altars to which the objects of the senses are being offered as oblations to the deities or divine powers presiding over these organs or senses. This is a ritual taking place every moment, leading to attainment of the supreme by burning to ashes the pluralities in the fire of realization. To take an example, if a piece of glass is placed over a paper on which some lines have been drawn, the glass appears as being cracked along those lines, even though in fact it is not cracked at all. If the paper is removed, the apparent cracks disappear and the piece of glass looks whole. Similarly, the unified consciousness appears to be endowed with diversities in the light of the diversity of names and forms. Yagna is the activity which removes the anonymous motion of diversity and restores the wholeness, which is the innate nature of consciousness. The power which makes it possible in this body is called Adi Yagna. The Lord says that this ritualistic entity is activated by him, and so in this body, he is what is called Adi Yagna. It is thus be clear that Adi Bhuta, Adi Deva, and Adi Yagna are entities which creates the illusion of diversity in the Supreme, immutable, transcendent, but it is also with their help that the transcendent can be experienced.
So yagya, we understand, right? At the grossest level, we understand yagya as a ritual where we sit around, a ritualistic fire, and we are offering various oblations to it. And there is an end goal, which is typically to acquire something, right? Now that could be of anything that you want to acquire out of it. So that's the grossest form of yagya. Now, we have understood as we've gone through the first 6 chapters that there are presiding deities of everything around us. And that is a divine way of living life. When we live life in a more conscious manner, when we live life in connection with Lord, then we'll start to see Lord's immanence in everything around us. And how do we see Lord's immanence in everything around us? Is by recognizing Lord being present. and his powers being present. And his powers are what are called the deities, the presiding deities. So there would be a presiding deity of water, which is called the Lord Varun. There's a presiding deity of Vayu, presiding deity of earth. There's presiding deity of everything that we see around us, right? Similarly, when we approach our own body, then there is a presiding deity of every organ. There is a presiding, and when we do certain actions or when we interact with these organs, then that action can be termed a yajna. So for example, there is a presiding deity of your stomach, and the fire of stomach, the Jat Agni, is called the fire of digestive system. And when we eat food, that food that we eat are the oblations that we offer to that ritualistic fire of your digestive fire, right? And the very act of eating becomes your yajna. Okay, when we live life with that level of consciousness, then our life becomes extremely divine, right? It becomes divine because we are so conscious. When you start to think about the act of eating as an act of yajna, then you can imagine that you will not offer bad foods or alcohol or anything that is not good for your body. You will just not offer it. Stale food, bad food, chips or whatever, right? You will become more aware. Is this what you want to offer to your Lord? Is this what you want to offer to the God here? It is not pure, it is not clean. Slowly, as you become more and more conscious, your eating habits will themselves start to become cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. Okay, which is why they say that you don't have to, your habits of food habits will not change your essential nature, but as you cleanse yourself, it will automatically lead to a cleansing of your food habits. It's not the other way around, right? So this action is called yajna, right? And what is the purpose of doing this yajna? The purpose, there's always a purpose to it. You're trying to acquire something, you're trying to get to something. The ultimate purpose of yajnas is to reach God, is to cleanse ourselves so that we can reach God. That is the ultimate form of yajna. So basically, we are doing yajna every moment. And what actions are termed yajnas? Not every action is termed yajna, right? Not everything that we do becomes yajna. Our actions become yajna. Our actions become a form of sacrifice when we do it in yoga with the Lord. When we go past our likes and dislikes and do the right thing, those type of actions become a sacrifice. And why are they called a sacrifice? Because in those actions, we are sacrificing our ego. We are sacrificing our likes and dislikes. We are sacrificing the concept of dualities, and we are moving towards oneness. Every sacrifice that we do takes us one step closer to our end goal of reaching the divinity. So, if our entire life becomes one big act of sacrifice, that means we have already achieved the Lord, because Lord in his own self is one big sacrifice. Everything he does, everything that gets done in this world can be only achieved through sacrifice. Anything in this world is activated only through sacrifice, because as Abhinav said, Lord's very first act was that of sacrifice.
So let me add here, right? So
Sorry, one last thing just to cover this whole thing. And now this is yajna, right? The power, the subtler power that powers all of these sacrifices, the power that sits behind these yajnas is called adhyajna. Okay, whether it is at a gross form or at the subtler form. So we're talking about the subtlest form of yajnas on an everyday basis. The very power that activates the sacrifice, this act of sacrifice in an everyday basis, in every moment, is adhyajna. And Lord says, I am the essential nature of adhyajna, because I did the first sacrifice, the primal sacrifice. Oh, sorry.
So just adding to that, right? His very first primal urge was to create, and he created with an act of sacrifice. Correct? So, which is a very big sacrifice. He gave himself to create all of this, right? Now, for us to go to, so for us, when we do anything with Yagya Bhav, which was an entire chapter we focused on, we are reaching the very core nature of the Lord and giving up our oneness. Giving up our individuality to reach oneness. And when we reach that oneness, when we are in that bhav that we are all one, you will see Adi Buddha, because you will see God across all matter around you. You will be in touch with your Adi Deva. You will have a much stronger voice, inner voice, and witness on what you're doing, what you're not doing. You will all your actions that you are bound to do will be done with the right bhav, with the right intent, because it's Yagya Bhav, which means you will come to your true self, which is your individualized self. And it all starts with being able to do an act with Yagya Bhav.
So Yagya was the start of the creation of multiplicity from wholeness, and Yagya is the only process to be able to go back to that wholeness from multiplicity.
And what he's also saying in this is, if you don't do the Yagya, then you will live with the illusion of diversity that is there all around you. But the moment you live your life with the Yagya Bhav, with Yagya Bhav, just to remind people, is to offer the fruits of your actions to Bhagwanji. So you're not claiming ownership of anything that you are doing. You are offering everything you receive as a prasad, whether it's a positive thing or a negative thing. Right? That's Yagya Bhav. And if you live your life with that Yagya Bhav, you will see oneness. You will see Adhi in everything. You don't live with that, then you will live life with only experiencing the diversity.
And so through all of these things, what are we trying to understand? We're trying to understand the process through which Bhagwanji manifested through which he manifested the world. So we are trying to understand his power of Maya. Right? So we're going deeper into that.
I feel like we still have 18 minutes, but I feel like it's being quite heavy. And next few shlokas are about
5, 6, and 7, they are connected.
Yeah.
No, but we can do 5 and 6. I think at least 5 we can do. We can revise it.
Any questions, guys?
Yeah, I mean, this is a bit heavy, but as Bhagwanji thinks, we are all ready for it.
I have one question. So the Yagya Bhav is the basis for everything, right? So the Adi Yagya, the Adi Yagya is behind that whatever we are doing with the Yagya Bhav. So there is the, through the Yagya Bhav only we can see the oneness, right? And also, then we can connect to Adibhuta and Adideva in that sense. I mean, I just want to see whether my understanding is okay.
Yeah. So Yagya Bhav is the Bhav with which you will do a Yagya, right?
Yeah.
This is what Yagya Bhav converts a normal action into an action of sacrifice. So Yagya Bhav is what converts a karma into Yagya.
Yeah.
Okay. And the power that helps us convert everything into a Yagya, the power of sacrifice. So the power behind Yagya Bhav is Adi Yagya.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yadalina, actually, though it's a very not related to this, but I want a deeper explanation between intellect and mind, Give me that, it becomes a bit like confusing. How do you differentiate?
Intellect and mind. Okay. So intellect is basically a knife. Okay. It is the discerning capacity. It is your discerning ability to differentiate between what is right and what is wrong. what we should do, what we shouldn't do in a certain situation. That is intellect. Okay. Mind, on the other hand, is the capacity to wonder. It is where emotions lie. Okay. Intellect has got nothing to do with emotions, right? Intellect will help you discern, okay, this is A, this is B, this is C. Okay. Emotions, feelings of any kind of bhav that you talk about emerges from the mind. Mind also has the capacity to wonder, right? And the capacity of mind is really, really large, right? So intellect is much smaller compared to mind, which has a huge capacity to, which has a huge power, because it is when things get tough, it is the feelings and the mind that will push you beyond the adversity, right? Not intellect. It never is. So the power of mind is way more than the power of intellect. You will use
So
intellect.
is this something like knower? Knower जो आपका जानता है, like the subconscious mind, it's intellect which knows this is, mind gives you, doesn't have a power to, intellect can knows deep down in any situation what is right.
There are
Sahi kya.
the knower. Knower is only one. Knower is your Jivatma. It is the Bhagwanji, the Brahman inside of you. He's the knower. These are only different tools in his hand. Ego is a tool. Mind is a tool. Intellect is a tool. There are three different tools meant to do different things. Right? So contemplative tool is the mind. Okay. Discerning tool is your intellect, and the deterministic tool, the tool to be able to differentiate between different aspects of things, is the ego. So all three of them are different tools meant to do different things, like in a handyman's bag. Depending on the situation, you take out a different tool to do something else.
Okay.
They're not the knower. The knower is the one who uses these tools.
And from a more day-to-day perspective, right? How do you differentiate whether a thought is a mind or a intellect? Where is it stemming from? I'm guessing that's what your real question is, right? How do I observe whether this thought is actually from my mind or from my intellect? Correct or no?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in that, it is first we'll just need to build a little bit of self-awareness. When your mind is in non-stop chatter, when you're just in your head, there is a non-stop chatter which exists throughout. You're brushing your teeth, you're waiting at the bus stop, you're walking to the lift. There is a non-stop chatter, right? Most of that chatter would be mind. The intellect would be when you would be using, when you need to do something with a certain purpose, right? So you are saying, okay, I need to do something. I need to get up and go about doing something. I'm asking myself a question. I am directing myself to get up and do something. Those are where you will have intellect come in, direct, and move away. And then the mind will take over in most cases again, because your habits are all sitting at the mind, emotion, body level, right? When we say Antakaran Shuddhi, part of what our work is to sharpen this intellect. We actually use very little of our intellect on a day-to-day basis. We engage a lot more with our mind than our intellect. And the way to engage and activate the intellect is by being purposeful. Asking, what am I doing? Am I doing it? What purpose am I doing it with? And what bhav am I doing it with? So instead of trying to understand which of my thoughts is intellect, which of my thought is mind, it is more important for us to activate the intellect by keeping 2-3 questions always on standby. Otherwise, your mind will take over. And
so here's another thing, right? Intellect is
emotions and feelings in this situation.
Emotions and feelings sit in your mind.
Yeah.
All your passions in your mind, and your intellect is very dispassionate. There are no feelings in there. Okay. All activities are done. Your mind has to be behind it. So the role of intellect is to first discern what action should be taken. I have A, B, or C that can be done. I select A because of whatever reason. So intellect comes into play there. Intellect then directs mind, and mind will then take over the passion, the emotions that need to help you carry forth on that task. That is where the mind takes over. Otherwise, if it is not there, right, mind only acts on likes, dislikes, likes, dislikes. It is the job of intellect to direct the mind and say, like this and not that. Like this. This is good. Loki is good for health. Eat it. Loki is good. Okay. That is your intellect's job. Otherwise, your mind will only go with taste. My taste, what is my taste buds telling me? I like chips. Right? But mind will tell you start liking Loki. Over a period of time, intellect saying that again and again and again to mind, eventually mind will start enjoying Loki as well.
So so coming back to the question, keep 2-3 questions which activate your intellect. On a regular basis, everything you're doing, activate those questions. What is the purpose of this activity? What is the bhav with which I'm supposed to do this activity? Can I connect this to Bhagwanji as an offering? You may not have. So what is the purpose of an activity? What is the bhav with which I'm doing the activity? What is the intent and emotion with which I'm doing the activity? And third is, can I connect the outcome of this activity to Bhagwanji as Yagya Bhav? And you may not have answers to everything immediately, but that's part of sharpening the intellect. You're welcome to come and share in class that, hey, I was cleaning the house and I didn't know what bhav to have, right? Great. That's a very practical question to ask. More than happy to have a conversation around that. But these 3 questions will keep activating your intellect to direct the mind, to direct the body, to direct the habit.
So actually, अभी तक तो ये लगता था कि emotions and mind are 2 tools, and emotion takes you in likes and dislikes area, and then the mind has to contemplate and make the right decisions. Like, मेरा मन तो करता है मैं रोज केक खाऊं, and then the intellect said, if you eat cakes, you're going to be, at this age, this happens, and that's the capacity. But then now you understand that the mind and the intellect are 2 tools, So it was a bit of, confusion for me to understand. But then now what I get is that mind, the feelings and emotions fall into the category of mind, and intellect is what has a discerning capacity of, is it, am I right?
Yes, but mind is,
okay.
So emotions and feelings sit under mind. That's absolutely true. But mind is emotions and feelings. Okay, mind is bigger than that.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? Mind
is bigger.
One has the capacity to contemplate. मन का कहते मन क्यों है? क्योंकि मन मनन कर सकता है. Right? That is why it is manan. And the one who does manan is Manish. Right? So we are human beings, Manu, human beings. We are human beings because we have mind and we have that contemplative faculty. And the contemplation has to be on Bhagwanji. So contemplation on Bhagwanji means what? Contemplation means everything that we do, how we think, how we do, what we do. So emotions and feelings sit inside Man, but that is not the entirety of Man. Man is much bigger than that, and it has much more capacity than to just feel. It has the capacity to wonder. It has the capacity to contemplate. Okay? That's what I'm trying to say. So don't just say, okay, my thoughts and feelings are Man. That's one aspect only.
That's one. Yeah, I get that. And then what's the role of an ego?
The role of ego is like a stamping factor, right? It's a stamping factor to recognize that, it's like saying, okay, when we are born, right? At the core of it, the very first thing that gets created is stem cells. Okay. Now these stem cells, as the body grows inside the womb, these stem cells then evolve into cells that create a stomach, cells that create muscles, cells that transform themselves into blood cells, and the stem cells get transformed into brain cells, right? So ego is like having that specialization. Okay. So when Stem cells will not do everything. You will specialize stem cells into various types of other cells that specialize in doing a certain specific activity. That is providing
Yeah.
ego to stem cells. Now I can say these are blood cells, these are muscular cells, these are digestive cells, these are the gray matter. Okay. And this is literally the type, this is literally stamping of an ego at a gross form. Then we say, there is this person who specializes, this is a doctor, that's an ego. There is a lawyer. These people specialize in doing things. Similarly, assigning roles to people. This is a mother who will do certain types of activities in the life of a child. There is a father, there is a grandfather, there are other relatives. Every one of them has a very specialized role to play in the life of a child, right? Similarly, so now you start to see these are organizing principles. Ego is an organizing principle to do, distinguishing and organizing principle to do specialized activities that will help achieve an outcome at a whole level, at a macro level. That's the only purpose of ego: specialization and being able to recognize different things, being able to refer to them.
So if you remember the example of that gold in jewelry, right? So there was one day a earring and a bracelet were hanging around, and they got into an argument.
Yeah, before that, right, just to directly answer a question using the example that you just raised, right? Gold. Now, gold is same everywhere. Now, when you transform gold into a special purpose to be worn in an ear, it becomes an earring. So then there is an ego attached to it. What is that ego? What that is a determinative factor. You say this is an earring. This is a finger ring. This is a bangle. That is ego. So you say something is a bangle.
So that's
something
the purpose of ego in its
being
form.
able to refer
the
to
challenge is when you become the ego.
Yeah.
And then you're like, no, earring is better than the bracelet. No, bracelet is better than earring.
But they're all the gold. There is
They're
no
all the
difference.
gold.
But we
Challenge
call
is
them
we've
differently because their use case is slightly different, and it helps. It makes it easy. When I'm talking to you, I will say, Rita, your earrings are looking beautiful. Rita, can I see your bangle? It helps. It makes it easy for me to talk to you. Otherwise, if I see your gold is beautiful, can I see your gold? You won't be able to recognize which gold are you talking about, right? That is the only purpose. It makes it easy for us to refer to them and being able to
the
use
challenge
them.
is we become attached to it and we live with it saying I am and then I am better than you.
Yeah.
And that's the prominent and more easier the more the way we live, or the way we see ego.
The grosser form of ego, the demonic form of ego, right? That was not the purpose for which it was built. Then the bangle and the earrings start to fight that we are different because we are different in name and form. Name and form is different, but that doesn't make you any different because you're both made of gold.
That's
now,
ignorance. You're fighting about your difference. You both are ignorant because you both are gold. The same thing with us.
And what makes the difference is the way we look at it. So person who looks at it can say, if an ignorant person looks at a bangle, he will say, yeah, they are different. But if you give it to a jeweler, you give it to a johari, he will look at them as the same, right? He's only going to evaluate them both on the same parameters. What is the amount of gold in this? What will it turn into when I melt them down? He will treat them both equally. It doesn't matter how beautiful or intricate a particular bangle is. He will treat both the bangles equally. How much gold is in there, right? So it depends on who is viewing them and who's interacting with them. They can interact with it at the form of name and form, or he can interact with it at the level of the divinity inside of them.
So ego is basically when you forget God and you attach yourself or your name or form to it. That's when
ego is the distinguishing faculty. Ego is the distinguishing faculty, the organizing faculty, the organizing principle. Now, how we use it, it's a tool. Now you can use it as a tool to say that I am this, I am that, or you can use it as a tool to help organize the world.
Yeah, I get that. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for taking everybody's time. I thought,
these are not easy questions to answer or understand.
Yeah.
Right. Should we do closing shloka?
I can do it.
Oh, sure, please.
Just a second.